Hey everyone, it's Scott from StartMedia.com, and I'm going to be showing you how to properly set up and configure iThemes security. This will be the free version. I'll walk you through all the settings and the simple installation process and go over my own recommended settings that you should be using for your site. So iThemes has both a free and a pro version, and this video will be strictly covering the free version. To download iThemes, go to the plugins menu, add new, type in iThemes security, should come straight up. There it is. Click the install menu, then you click activate. Now, when you add it, you'll get this new menu at the bottom left, and we're going to go directly into the settings. So when you first start it, it's going to go ahead and try to suggest you activate some recommended features. We're going to just skip that for now. For most setups, this should be sufficient, more or less. But we're going to click close, and you would think that when you click close, it would disable or not enable all those features, but it looks like it went ahead and did it anyways. Maybe I did something wrong there, but we're just going to skip it for now and configure the global settings. Allow iThemes to write to the WP config and HT access. This is required. If it's not enabled, it won't work. You can set your lockout message in all reality. This doesn't really matter unless you find real users are getting locked out a lot. Just an error screen will work just fine though for bots. User lockout message. This is a good message. You should just leave it as such, unless you need to translate it into your own language, in which case, go ahead and change that here. Community lockout message. This triggers when the IP has been flagged. You can go ahead and change this. I really recommend you cut out where it says iThemes security network, just so your IP address has been flagged as a threat by our network. That way it's more white labeled than latent free promotion iThemes security in the event of a real user being locked out. The blacklist repeat offender, basically if they get caught multiple times, they will be banned. I recommend enabling this option. The blacklist threshold, the number of lockouts per IP before the host is banned. 3 lockouts is a good amount. The blacklist look back period. How many days should a lockout be remembered to meet the blacklist count above? 7 days is fine. If you want to block more users, you can increase this period. The lockout period time is 15 minutes, which means that that IP address comes back 15 minutes again and gets locked out again. That's clearly going to be a bot. The lockout whitelist. If you find your IP address is getting locked out, go ahead and add them here. You should also whitelist common IP addresses such as Jetpacks or any other third-party service you are using. The log type, you can choose database only, which will put it all in your database, which it's not a good or bad option. The problem is when you put it in the database, it will continuously get larger, and it can be slower on a slower host. You can put the log type as file only, which is more convenient, but it will use more resources. So it's kind of a catch-22. It'll be slower and impact the performance more in the database, but it'll be slower on retrieval if you put it in file. In most cases, it's fine to use database, but I do lower the amount of days to keep database logs to at the most of 30 days. Chances are is you're not even going to be looking at these logs 9 times out of 10. So 30 days is fine. Anything lower would be 2 weeks, so 14 days, and you won't be looking at these logs very frequently, so it doesn't really matter. You can allow iThemes to data track you using telemetry. It just checks for a bunch of background stuff. It won't really hamper you, and it may be useful for them, but you can just leave it disabled. Proxy detection, set it to automatic. Or you can set it to manual. If you use manual, you can use Cloudflare. If you're using Cloudflare, It's easiest to set it to manual and use the Cloudflare connecting IP. But automatic in most situations works for me out of the box. So unless you notice it not working, you can leave it at automatic. Hide security menu in the admin bar. I enable this because this menu is really obnoxious. And show error codes. iThemes has error codes that it can be used to help diagnose issues. I leave it to just the default of no. If I'm diagnosing an actual issue, then I will enable it. But for most users, just leave it on no. So then you're gonna go ahead and click Save Settings. The Notification Center. This is your emails being sent to you. Default recipients. Don't send all emails to all administrators. This is especially true if you have a website and you allow other people to go on. Maybe you have a marketer or you have an author on your site and they have administrator privileges because they're your co-owner. You just leave it only to the one who actually needs to get the data. Normally that's you since you're setting it up, or if you have somebody who works for IT or things of that nature, only send it to them. And the from email doesn't really matter. You can just leave it to the default. Database backup. I'm honestly not a fan of iThemes database backup functionality. If you want solid backups, you'll want to have them offsite or use a plugin like Updraft and then download it, or you can pay someone to do it for you on a regular basis. But I don't recommend this option, period, so this thing doesn't matter. Security digest. You will be getting a lot of emails. So set how often you want a security digest to be sent. If you're only doing it weekly, that's fine. Chances are is you're not going to be reading most of them anyway. So set it weekly and you'll get like a full overview. Recipient, you can set if you're going to click default, it's going to fall back to this setting. So if you didn't set this up, or you did, but you want to send the security brief to other people, just click custom and then click the one person you want it to go to. In this case, just me, since this is a test site. Finally, there are site lockouts. Site lockouts, you don't need emails for every site lockout. It's just unnecessary. Chances are is if you get these emails repeatedly, your site will be end up being flagged by whatever email service you're using. I've seen sites with a similar plugin like WordPress that got hammered a lot, and then all their emails just started going directly to spam. Just disable the site lockout notification. You don't need to know every time someone is locked out of your website. Just rely on the security digest. You're gonna click save. 404 detection. I'm not a fan of this. I recommend leaving this disabled from a performance standpoint because, like the redirection plugin, this will hammer your database. It's not worth it. And if somebody is snooping around on your site and getting hit with a lot of 404s, they're going to do that anyways. And their IP address will probably end up being flagged as being brute forced. And this is just not necessary. Away mode. This is an interesting feature, but I've never found a really good use case, but I'm going to go ahead and show you it anyway. You can disable access to the WordPress dashboard on a scheduled time period. So if you're the only one on your WordPress dashboard, you can block out total access to it, say during, let's just say 12 p.m. to 8 a.m. So when you're sleeping, no one can access it. Now this is great, but it's really annoying. First of all, it depends on the WordPress admin panel time zone, and most people that I see don't even set this option up correctly in the first place. It'll show them like 6 hours ahead when they're not. And even right now, this test site is 5 hours ahead. It's just not a very good setup. If you have a very niche use case, or you're going to be on a one-time, I know I'm going to be away from this week this whole week and I will not have my laptop. Just never been a good use case for this. But if you have the use case, it's fairly easy to set up. Banned users, simple and sweet. Banned users will block IP addresses from accessing the website. I recommend, first off, you enable hackrepairs.com blacklist. It's a very solid blacklist, updated frequently. Just enable it. Then there's the ban list. You can block IP addresses here, and you can block them by user agent. Unlike in something like WordFence, which will do a lot of this automatically, this option, if you find yourself getting hammered by a very repeated IP address in the logs and it's bringing your site down, or if you look in your cPanel's AW stats and you notice a recurring IP address, you can block them here. But in all honesty, the hack repair and the default brute force protection should be just enough for your site. But if you notice one IP address slipping through, you can go ahead and ban them here. Or if you notice a blank user agent or a specific user agent from a device that you wouldn't recognize, you can block those here as well. Good news though is you can't ban yourself, so that's good to know. Go ahead and click your save, and then database backups. I don't recommend running them. They're just they're not unreliable. I don't want to say they're unreliable, but sending it to your email is just not good. Most people don't open all the emails they get, and if you get an email of your database backup once a day, you're not going to download it, and if you do, you're eventually going to miss one, and it's just not reliable. And storing backups on site is also not reliable, so it's just not a really good option. I just typically leave this disabled. You gotta have a proper backup solution in the first place. If you're using something like Updraft or Blog Vault, or you're paying somebody to take care of this for you, you don't need this option. File change detection. You can monitor the site for file changes. I don't use this option personally, but I'm gonna go ahead and show you the configured options. Basically, what this will do is it will alert you if files have been modified in the WordPress installation. So if your WordPress includes, it's got a bunch of changed files, chances are is you've been hacked, and you can scan it there. It's very similar to the integrity check that WordFence does, but it's just, it's good for more hack recovery rather than being alerted, because files will change all the time. Oftentimes you'll see them flagging TXT files that maybe the spacing is off by one, the things that are really minor, and you'll just get bothered with emails that don't really matter. So I don't recommend this option. File permissions. This is actually a really good check for your site. So your folders are all 75. The suggested for WordPress config and htaccess is 4444. 6444 is what WordPress.org recommends. What this will do though is it will prevent anyone from writing to these files, and that's important if your site's already set up. If you have a website where the WP config and htaccess are modified, they're probably redirecting you to some spam site, and these are the most common files that are hacked in general. The only downside is if you have a plugin that you're adding that needs to write there, you'll have to go ahead and change those permissions back to 644 so that they can write to it. But these suggestions are really good. If you're worried about your just general security of your site, go ahead and enable this option, let it reload the file permission details, and honestly, I would go with the recommendation if your site's fully built and it's just existing. Make sure that there's at the 444 and 444 here. Then there's the local brute force protection. Protect your site against attackers that try to randomly guess login details. This is quintessential for your website. You're going to go to the configure settings, and it's really simple. Automatically ban admin user. This should be enabled. If you are actually using admin as your username, you should delete that user account after creating a new one and ban it, because that is the first thing everybody guesses: admin, administrator, and then normally the site name. the most commonly guessed ones, and you just want to ban them immediately because otherwise they're just going to continue to waste resources. The max login attempts per host. So if a user or host is guessed 5 times incorrectly, it will be blocked. Max login attempts per user is 10 attempts. And minutes to remember the bad login. 5 minutes is a good amount. If you want to be more secure, you can set it to like 15. But chances are with bots is once they hit your site, they'll just continuously hit it repeatedly until they're banned. So this really only affects active, bad, malicious users. The network brute force protection is basically their WordFence like network. It'll know bad IP addresses, and it will use that data if something comes up in their system, and let's say they're logging it from a known bad IP address, it'll block it if the network is known to it. This should always be enabled, and I don't recommend letting them email you nonsense, but go ahead and enable this option if it wasn't enabled. Really good option. Password requirements. Everybody should have strong user passwords. And the minimum role, if you don't want to annoy regular users, click administrator. If you use editors, authors, then set the lowest to author. For contributors, they can't publish or edit posts that aren't theirs, and they can't even publish their own posts. They have to be enabled by someone of higher rank. So their login capacity doesn't matter as much. If you want to annoy everybody, set it to subscriber. But most users have really bad passwords already, and if the sign up process keeps flagging them saying they have a weak password, it'll just frustrate them and they will quit. They'll just quit trying to sign up. So at the very least, make sure all administrators have strong passwords. Enforce it. SSL, if you have an SSL on your server, this will allow you to redirect all the pages. This option doesn't really mean a lot, but basically, if you have an SSL, click enabled, don't click advanced. You don't need a SSL backend and a non-SSL front end unless some third-party resource you're using requires it to not be SSL. And if that's the case, you should probably find a different third-party resource, but enable it. All HTTP requests should be set to HTTPS. If you're using another plugin like really simple SSL, or you're on SiteGround and you're using the SiteGround optimizer, disable this. System tweaks. Advanced settings to improve the security by changing the server config. It's not really server config, it's mostly just really smart htaccess rules, and this is where iThemes kind of shines. So protect system files, prevent public access for readme text, WP config, blah, 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 blah. These will just stop files that should not be accessed by bots from being read. It will just straight up block access to the files so they can't be read. This is important, this should be enabled. If you're on Apache and you have directory browsing enabled and you haven't turned them off, directory browsing is just indexes in Apache, which will, if you go to a website, it'll show a list of all the files on there in a folder, and you click it and it'll take you to the next one. Disable that. Terrible idea. Request methods, filter request methods with trace or trackback request methods. You can enable this one as well. Suspicious query strings. This should be enabled if a query string, this may cause issues with some plugins, but more or less, a common form of hack is to use an SQL injection, which will normally just include a long query string with SQL code written in it trying to inject data into the database. This is supposed to prevent against that. It can break some plugins and themes though, so be wary. Non-English characters. If your site's in English, then you might want to enable this. If it's not, don't enable this. This should not be used and only works when filter suspicious query string has been selected. So again, if your site's in all English and you have this option enabled and it's working, enable this option next. Filter long URL strings. Limits the number of characters that can be sent in the URL. Again, this is another SQL injection type protection. You can enable this option and it will help prevent SQL injections from occurring on the website. I don't know what the exact character limit is though. File writing permissions. This will basically just prevent writing to WP config and htaccess. This will take care of the warning that we saw in an earlier option. If you haven't done this or you don't know how to do it yourself, this will go ahead and do it for you. And if you turn it off, it'll automatically set the permissions back. So this should be enabled. PHP in the uploads folder, this should be enabled. You will never have a PHP uploaded in the WP content uploads folder. If you do, you've gone down the rabbit hole. PHP in plugins, disable plugin PHP in the plugins directory. This will block requests when trying to access PHP files directly. So it won't stop PHP from running, but if somebody tries to go to the plugins directory directly and execute code, it won't work, but subfolders will. So your themes will still function and your plugins will still function, but anything in the WP content plugins and themes section won't run. Normally there's no code in these folders anyway, so these can be you can go ahead and enable this, click the save button. WordPress salting passwords is an additional measure from just encrypting them. It is basically a token that makes it incredibly difficult for passwords to be cracked. You should change your salts. In theory, it should be done on an automatic basis, but changing your salts will it won't require you to change your passwords. It'll just mess up your current logged in. So if you're logged in, it'll log you out. But salts makes it harder to guess. If you were hacked at some point, you will want to change your WordPress salts, because if they got the data from the database, then you'll want to go ahead, change the salts, and you want to request new passwords, things of that nature. This is a good feature to have. If you do this, click save, it'll log you out, you log back in, everything will work exactly the same. You don't need to do this very frequently, but you should still do it if you've been hacked or you suspect you've been hacked. And then there's WordPress tweaks. Most of these are not really security related, but they're still good to have. Disable Windows Live Writer header. Most people don't use Windows Live Writer anymore, so this is fine to remove. Edit URI header, which is the RSD or XML RPC service. If you're using Jetpack, you can enable this, but if you're not using Jetpack, go ahead and enable it. Comment spam. This will cut down on comment spam by blocking users with no refer or user agent provided. This should just go ahead and be enabled. File editor, that'll disable your ability to edit your themes and plugins, which you should never be editing those from the admin panel anyways, but everybody doesn't, including me. It just happens. So go ahead and enable that if your site's already built. XML RPC, you can enable or disable it. Again, not using Jetpack, disable it. If you are using Jetpack, disable the pingbacks, because pingbacks are just annoying spam. They'll never really provide you a benefit. And you can fully enable XML RPC, which basically just leaves it as default. And that's it for this free version config. There's a lot more in the pro version, but before we sign off, let's go to the security check thing, which is once again, click here, click secure your site, and this will just go ahead and check all your recommended settings. This is enabled, this is enabled. Their recommended settings are decent, but they're not amazing. With the network brute force protection, you gotta add your email address. I do not want to be spammed. You click this, you activate it, and there we go. Run the site audit again. My site's secured. iThemes is an overall really strong security choice. It does add a lot of functionality to help protect your website. There are some settings that I don't recommend you run. We went through those. Database backups, don't recommend running because you should have a better system. 404 detection, it shouldn't be enabled because you're not going to check it anyways. Banned users should be enabled. And the rest, the SSL option though, if you have another SSL plugin installed, don't enable this or you'll get a redirect loop. And that's about it. You can check your logs over here, which we mostly disabled them, so they don't do much now. But there you go. That is how to fully set up and configure iThemes security free version. There will be another video covering the pro version, but this video should get your site secured in most cases. iThemes is a great plugin. I would call it second best compared to WordFence, but they're both really good at their own jobs. If you have any questions about it, you can ask me below and I'll try to help you, or you can just go over to the iThemes support forums and they'll be able to help you directly. Thank you much for watching, and goodbye.